Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on your location. We will get started at 1:01 p.m. Eastern Time, so 1 minute past the top of the hour. Please be patient with us as we prepare for our webinar. Thank you. Again, good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on your location. We will get started in about a minute and a half at 1:01 p.m. Eastern Time. Please be patient with us as we prepare for our program. Again, good morning, good evening, good afternoon, depending on where you are. We'll get started in roughly 30 seconds at 1:01 p.m. Eastern Time. All right, I have 1:01 p.m. Eastern Time. Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on your location. Thank you for joining us today for our LPF webinar titled From Preparedness to Empowerment, sponsored by Prime Communications. My name is Matt Schreiner, and I'm the Director of Operations for the Loss Prevention Foundation. I will be your host today. Before we get started, we would like to thank Prime Secured for sponsoring today's LPF webinar. Prime Secured, a sector of Prime Communications, provides custom technology solutions to protect and connect your people and facilities. Prime services include IP video surveillance, access control, cloud-based video management, workplace violence prevention, de-escalation training, gunshot detection, burglary alarms, managed offerings, and design and consulting services. Now let's talk about a few logistics items. First and foremost, this session is being recorded, and a link to the session will be sent out to all registrants tomorrow. All participants are muted to minimize disruption to the audience and our presenters, and audio is available through the Zoom platform and through the dial-in number provided during your registration. We do ask that any and all questions are entered into the Q&A box within the Zoom platform, and we will hold those questions until the end of the presentation to ensure that we're able to get through the material that has been prepared. Now let's meet our speakers. Joining me today, we have Jamie Bumgardner, Chief Operating Officer and Vice President for Prime Communications. Jamie's extensive background in security and automation industries continues to expand Prime Communications technology offerings and is a strong advocate for proper protection of assets through technology convergence and the application of advanced technology. Good afternoon, Jamie.
Hey, good afternoon, Matt. Good to see you again, and thanks for having us.
Likewise, sir. Next up, we have Dustin Randall. Dustin is the Chief Operating Officer at Safe Passage Consulting. Dustin is a combat veteran of both the United States Army and the United States Marine Corps and has worked in law enforcement for many years. Thank you for your service, Dustin, and good afternoon.
Hey, thank you, Matt. I'm glad to be here.
And at this time, I will turn it over to Jamie.
Thanks, Matt. So before we begin, I just wanted to share a little bit about Prime Communications. We were founded in 2001. We've been in the technology industry for 20 years, providing a host of technology solutions to help protect people, property, and assets for our partners. Over the 20 years, we really feel like we've become specialized in that specific deliverable, and recently just released a customer satisfaction report indicating over 97% satisfaction rate amongst our customers. However, deploying this technology is really only part of what we do. If we refer to the as-is protection of asset manuals, there's really three major components we need to think about when we're designing and planning for the protection of people, assets, or property. And that's really people, process, and technology. So recently, we've joined in a very close partnership with Safe Passage and are offering a product called Prime Guidance that really helps Prime provide to our end users the assessment piece of this, the training piece of this, the process and procedure piece of, and we're able to combine that with our technology that we deploy for our clients. So with that, I'll turn it over to you, Dustin.
Thanks, Jamie. Just a little bit more about my background. I've been a SWAT officer in Columbus, Ohio. Just recently retired after 20 years. I've been teaching through the alert platform for almost 20 years, active shooter response and scenario training. And I have a bachelor's in criminal justice from Purdue University. So I've been passionate about this topic specifically. While I do other things, this topic really rings home for me, just because able to help people that may not have had a plan previously in their lives and use that in their daily life and along with their families. So we'll go ahead and get started here. With our combination, with our close partnership with Prime, we're able to offer the 360-degree platform for all of our clients. And we begin that with a physical security assessment. We identify gaps in security. We provide solutions for each problem that are supported by FEMA guidelines. And then, Prime, with their extensive technology background, is able to come in and say, okay, here's where the gaps in security are, here's your solutions, and here's how we fulfill those solutions for our clients. We develop threat assessment teams with our clients across the country. The team members will convene and identify and evaluate potential threats to their organization. And we encourage these teams to meet monthly at the very least. We encourage our clients to bring in parties from all aspects of their industry. So everyone has a say in that. And then policy and procedure review. A lot of times our policies and procedures are out of date or need updated or sometimes they need shrunk down to be more simplistic so that everyone can understand. So we work closely with our clients on the ground to make sure that their policies and procedures match with their security plan that we help them develop. And then our active aggressor and shooter response training, we have a level 1, which we're going to just get a small sample of today, and a level 2, which is all scenario based, medical scenarios along with proper tourniquet use, bleeding control. Number 1 killer in any active aggressor, active shooter scenario is blood loss. So we do medical scenarios, and then we move into active live fire scenarios. And these are not scenarios to scare the daylights out of people. They're scenarios to show people that they can be empowered and that they have options in these events. And then our de-escalation training, which is a newer product, but in our world today, especially with the COVID-19 pandemic, a lot of folks out there are elevated higher than they would be. There's a lot of stress out there, and we teach people how to identify these threats and become that master communicator, and possibly we can quell these folks before they become a violent problem. And then we'll move into the next slide. If you were involved in an active shooter situation, what would you do? Would you run? Would you hide? Would you follow others' leads? Or you just don't know? You haven't thought about it? Maybe you've never had a plan evaluated in your mind before. So we're anxious to see how you would answer that. Okay, resounding votes for run, which is good. It shows that that we've been paying attention and exactly what we want to do. We want to get out of that area, and we'll go into that a little bit more here shortly. What is your employer doing about active shooter situations? Do they have a plan and practice that plan? I think we have a plan, or I have no idea. Oftentimes, this can be difficult throughout the nation with different industries. Some people don't know if they have a plan, or they haven't been properly trained on it. Maybe they haven't been there long enough. All right, 86%, we have a plan in practice. But you see the 10%, I think we have a plan, and the 4%, I have no idea. So hopefully our employers are at least trying to get us some basic information. We're going to talk a little bit about the history of active shooter situations in the U.S. I did a lot of research and went all the way back to 1903 in Winfield, Kansas. Now, this was the first recorded active shooter event. Of course, they didn't call it that then. It was looked at as an isolated event that would probably never happen again. But the criminal actor in this event was angry at the entire town. He had some mental issues going on. He was not medicated for, and he had it in his head that everyone was out to get him. So he gets a child's wagon, a red wagon, and puts a 12-gauge shotgun and some other firearms that he was able to buy at a hardware store. And he covers it with a blanket, and he pulls this wagon down to an alley in Winfield, Kansas during a music festival. So the center of town is heavily populated with everyone attending this music festival. And when everyone convenes, he comes out of the alley and starts shooting. Now he's firing a double-barreled 12-gauge shotgun, and he's able to fire 7 volleys from this shotgun, which means that he's firing both barrels and then breaking that shotgun down, pulling those cartridges, spent cartridges out, and putting new rounds in, reassembling the shotgun and firing again. Now, obviously in 1903, this was not a thought on anyone's mind, but it's interesting to look back that far and understand that this is not a new phenomenon. Then moving a few years later, I'm sure we've all heard of this event, the Austin University of Texas Tower. Our offender in this situation murders his mother and his wife across town. And then he drives with the rifles that you see there in the bottom right corner and his car, and immediately climbs to the top of the tower in the middle of the campus. I've been to this campus many times. I've seen this tower. It's still there. You can see it from everywhere on the campus. Unfortunately, he's a former U.S. Marine. He was kicked out of the Marines for mental instability. But he climbs to the top of this tower and barricades himself on top of it, meaning that he blocks 2 separate doorways, one at the bottom of the tower and one at the top, with tables, heavy items, in order to prevent police from getting to him. So he's up there for 90 minutes before they're able to get to him. He kills 13 people and wounds 31 more, firing rifle rounds from the top of this tower. It takes a campus security officer and a Austin police officer armed with 6-shooter revolvers to forcefully break their way into the top of the tower, and they're able to engage him and stop this shooting. But it was after this event that SWAT teams started being formed, the first one being in LA, Los Angeles, to answer these types of situations. They understood at that point they were a little outgunned and weren't trained properly. So that's where we started seeing formations of special weapons and tactics teams across the country. Then moving forward, Columbine in 1999. I'm sure we all remember this tragedy, and which is exactly what it was. We had 2 shooters in this event. And one thing that we're passionate about at Safe Passage is we don't use the shooters' names. We don't believe that they deserve any recognition, and the media already does a good job of doing that. We've worked with them, but yet the first thing that we see when a shooting is being reported is a picture of our bad guys or bad girl's face and their entire history. And the story shouldn't be about them. It should be about how we recover as a society and how we get our community feeling safe again. So why I say that, with this shooting being the most prevalently, probably everyone knows one or both of these shooters' names. And that's exactly what they were going for. They wanted that notoriety. They wanted to be famous. They even wrote about it in their journals saying, we're going to be famous for this. Everyone's going to know our name after this. And unfortunately, they were correct about that part. These kids obtained these firearms illegally, and they planned this shooting for a year. They get what's called the anarchist cookbook. This is before the internet you could just type in how I want to make a pipe bomb, and it shows you 100 different ways. They get the anarchist cookbook and follow the directions on how to make over 100 IEDs. They make pipe bombs, they make propane tank bombs, and their plan was to bomb the school first, and then shoot all the students and faculty as they tried to flee the building. So they plan this out for a year. They go to the range and they train. They film this on a camcorder. And the day that they picked for the attack, April 20th, 1999, they picked that, and we know this from their journal, they picked that day because it was Adolf Hitler's birthday. So that's who we're dealing with in this situation. So they placed these propane bombs at support structures in the school. They conceal them enough in trash cans, and their plan was to bring the second level of the school down onto the first level of the school, right over the cafeteria. And they planned the detonation to go off at 11:27 a.m. Now, they did that because that's when the largest majority of the student body would be in the cafeteria. So they were trying to kill as many people as they could in the initial blast, and then again, they were going to literally stand at the front of the school with the double doors and shoot people as they came out. Well, they didn't make their propane bombs right. They used plastic. They used plastic timers, plastic parts, and when the timer went off, it didn't complete the circuit. So the propane bombs don't go off. They're looking at each other. They're out in the parking lot. They're both at their cars, looking at each other, looking at their watches. Okay, this isn't going to work. We'll go to plan B. Well, they didn't have a plan B. Their plan B was just to start rushing at the school and shooting at it. Their school resource officer, who's a police officer, is sitting in his cruiser in a parking lot eating lunch. He sees this going on. He gets out of his car. He fires rounds at them. He misses. They fire rounds at him. They miss. They make it into the school. He gets on the radio and lets his dispatcher know what's going on. At that point, he's ordered to stay outside of the building and wait for SWAT. Now, in this area in Colorado, their SWAT team was a part-time team, and it was made up of officers from 3 different counties. So you can imagine how long it would take to convene a team like that. Well, it ends up taking about 45 minutes. During that time, hundreds of police officers are arriving on scene, and they're being ordered to stay outside. It was a huge tactical error that was immediately addressed, and policies across the country were immediately changed after the Columbine attack. Now, during that time, they killed 13 people, 12 students and 1 teacher. 10 of those students they killed in the library alone. And it's not because they were great shots or anything like that. The kids were being ordered by the librarian to lay on the floor, lay under their desks, and hide. And literally, the shooters were walking up to students at point blank and firing at them. So we learned a lot from this tragedy, and we understand that can't be an option in a situation like this. 24 other students are injured, and this situation has ended when the two shooters end their own lives in the library. Moving on, Virginia Tech in 2007. That building we're looking at is Norris Hall. It is a two-story L-shaped building. That large wooden door we see, the double door, our shooter is upset at women specifically. He can't get a date. He feels like women persecute him and they won't pay attention to him. So he picks this building because he thinks it would have the highest concentration of female students and older faculty that wouldn't cause any issues for him. So he plans this out for a while. He shoots a student, actually shoots two students. One's a teacher's assistant in his dormitory that morning of the attack, early in the morning. He just walks into a random room and kills a female student. And when the other student comes down to investigate, he kills him too. So now we have a double homicide on a college campus, and that's the way it's being investigated. It was originally being investigated as a domestic incident because it was a male and a female student. And so all the police resources are being diverted to that double homicide. And that was his plan. So he walks all the way across campus. It's a big campus. And by the time he gets over to Norris Hall, he has log chains in his book bag, over 300 rounds of ammunition and 2 handguns. He proceeds to put log chains around the doors, all 3 entrances, around the inside, and then he puts a note on the door that says, if you come in here, bombs will explode. Again, he's trying to delay that police response to give him more time. These shooters, they've studied previous events. They idolize previous shooters and they want to be just like them. So they study these events and they understand the more time they have, the more damage they can inflict. So he knew that he needed more time in this building than he was going to be allowed to have. So he took a lot of steps to make sure that he had more time. He proceeds up to the 2nd floor and immediately attacks room 211. Room 211 had a young lady named Christine Anderson in it, and she survives this attack. And I talk to her at conventions all the time. I've met her several times. Her plan before that was she didn't have a plan. No one had ever talked to her about anything like this. She was in a college level French class that morning. And when he entered the room shooting, she turned around on her desk and hid her face in her hands. And she said, I tried to play dead, thinking that he wouldn't shoot her. Well, he does shoot her, and then he leaves and he attacks other rooms. He comes back to her room 211 and attacks it again. He shoots her again. He leaves the 2nd time and he comes back a 3rd time, attacks the room again, and shoots her again. So playing dead did not work for her. She survived the event. She was shot in the foot, the rear end, and the upper shoulder. And she was immediately grabbed out of there and taken to the hospital where she recovered. But she now knows that was not a valid plan. Our shooter, again, when he hears the police finally breaching the door and coming up the stairs, he ends his life in front of room 211. Moving forward, Pulse nightclub shooting. Very, very tragic event as well. During this attack, our shooter in Orlando, Florida, had scouted out other locations that he was going to attack. And he was going to claim these attacks for ISIS and for terrorist organizations. And one of the locations he scouted in Orlando was Disney. And he's seen on CCTV recordings with a baby carriage at the front gate of Disney. And anybody that's ever been down there, there's heavy, heavy security at Disney parks. He's scouting it out. He sees that he probably wouldn't be very successful there. And post-investigation proved that he did not have a child and he didn't have any siblings that age. So it's thought that he had his firearms in that baby carriage that day. So he decides that he would attack the Pulse nightclub later that night. It's about 2 o'clock in the morning. He walks right by the police officer hired to work special duty at the front door with a large coat on, concealing that firearm we see to the right. That's a Sig Sauer rifle. .556 or .223 caliber, and walks into the club shooting. He immediately gets in a gunfight with that police officer at the front door, and the police officer is forced to retreat outside and take cover, and is calling in for backup. Now, our shooter is indiscriminately walking very calmly through the club, and people are laying down on the floor, and he's firing at them point blank. He then ends up, when police officers make entry into the building, he then ends up retreating into the bathroom that's encased in cinder block. He's now in a bulletproof fortress and takes hostages because there was a large group of people that had gone to the restroom to hide. And he unfortunately ends up murdering all of those hostages in that bathroom, and the SWAT team has to breach a hole in the wall from the outside to engage him in that situation. He kills 49 people in this event. 53 were injured. He fires 200 rounds in under 5 minutes. Very tragic event. So again, people were not properly trained. It's not their fault. It's just that they had never thought about what they would do. So they went to the bathroom, and that proved fatal for them. And that's a tragedy. And it's my I see it as my duty in life to make sure that people are trained properly and that they know they have options in these situations. Moving forward. So why is this still happening? Why do we think this is still happening? Why has there been such an uptick lately? We've heard about a lot of events lately. Jamie's going to talk about San Antonio airport situation here in a minute, but Indianapolis FedEx facility. The interesting thing about this attack is that it was an internal threat. This guy worked there. He knew when the shift change was occurring. So he picks when the shift change is occurring because he knew it would be chaotic. People coming, people going, doors being propped open for each other. Maybe one person scanning their card and 10 people flowing in behind them. We've all seen things like that. And he immediately starts shooting when he gets out of his car in a parking lot. And FedEx facility there did not have mass communication ability, and they have a no cell phone policy. So there were people all throughout the building that had no idea what was going on outside, which can be very dangerous. Which is again why we reach out to our clients. What are your policies? What are your plans? Does the no cell phone policy work when you don't have proper mass communication? We have to be able to talk to our people. We have to be able to warn people if there's a threat outside, if the threat is coming into the building. So we have to be aware of that. We have to have a way to communicate with our people. Communication is the biggest key in an event like this because they happen like that. They happen so quick. And Jamie, if you want to talk about San Antonio.
Yeah. Well, so April 15th, 2021, which is just 2 weeks ago, a gentleman tried to enter the lower level Terminal B luggage claim, had a backpack full of ammunition and weapons with the intent to do harm. Ironically, my son and I had just landed in San Antonio to go on a hunting trip with some friends of ours. We had proceeded down to the luggage claim, lower level Terminal B. And while we were waiting for our luggage, we heard 3 gunshots. And we were inside. The gunman was right outside the doors where we were standing. So when just kind of some takeaways of actually being in the event, the gunshots sounded differently because they were outside, not in the room, or I wasn't outside. So it took us a few seconds to realize that was actual gunfire. Fortunately, somebody came running in, yelled active shooter, and then it just flooded with people. So my son and I took off, started jumping over luggage claim racks to get out of the area. We finally did get back into the terminal. They pushed us down on the runway. And eventually we made our way back, did get our luggage, walked out of the adjacent door to where we were standing. And the gunman was, that's a picture I took there on the left. That's right outside the luggage claim door. His body was in the middle of that road and surrounded. But if he would have made it into that door, my son and I would have been the first two people he saw. He was less than 100 feet from where we were standing. But inside of that experience, definitely some takeaways I had. I've been through all of Safe Passage's training. So in that moment, I remember being very calm. I was not panicking. The things I learned in the training, I was going through my head, calculating what to do next. So just having been through that training, I can tell you the way Safe Passage does that training. It is training which you can actually implement, and they provide you the psychological perspective on what it will be like. So it was very powerful. And just since I do this for a living, and I go places, another takeaway I had was when I go places, public places, especially with a lot of people, I'm always very aware of my exits and where to go. And I do recall coming down the escalators when we arrived, identifying the exits on my left and two other exits on either end of the luggage claim. But what I did not anticipate was the threat coming through the exit I would have used, which really took all my exits away. So kind of thinking back, what would I have done differently? One thing I did not anticipate that I could have done was just jumped on the luggage claim belt and went back behind where they bring the luggage into the airport, and I would have been safe in seconds versus fighting the crowds. So and outside of that event, it gave my son and I an opportunity to talk through the event, if it impacted him, what he learned, what we could have done differently, and how he can implement this, when he goes to school and college on with the rest of his life. So fortunately, the police had the suspect before he killed anybody, and nobody else was harmed. So definitely an experience I don't want to go through again, but definitely some takeaways I wanted to share today. So.
Great. I'm glad you and your son are okay, Jamie. I remember hearing about that pretty shortly after you had experienced that. So, it hadn't been that long since we'd done our training together. So I'm glad that was able to help you. But remember, we want to get out. We want to get out of that area immediately. And if that means just like Jamie said, it's a great takeaway. If that means going through that little hole on the luggage belt to get back to where they load the baggage, so be it. If that means we have to smash a window out and go through it, we need to get out of that area as fast as possible. If we can't, and we're presented with the gunman, and we can barricade ourselves somewhere to delay them. But again, remember, that's not our end game. We need to get out of that barricaded area as well. So don't barricade ourselves in a bathroom we can't get out. Barricade yourself and then find a secondary exit. If we have to punch a hole through drywall and get into the next room, that's what we will do. And then if you are presented with the gunman as you're running, if you come face to face with them, remember, we're not fighting the gunman, we're fighting that gun. We attack that weapon and render it useless. So we get into that a lot more in the full training, but I commend you, Jamie, for your actions that day. And I'm sure that you and your son will have a heck of a story for the rest of your lives. So.
Yeah, no, thanks, Dustin.
Okay, we'll move on. Where do these events happen? I think we all know they happen everywhere. And as this map populates, think about where it is that you are. When I first started teaching this years and years ago, I had a lot of people telling me, that wouldn't happen here. This is a sleepy little town, or, this is, everybody knows each other. You look back at Winfield, Kansas. I'm sure it was like that there. As this populates, think about it, because where is the next one going to occur? We don't know. Unfortunately, bad things are going to happen, but it's how we respond to them that's important. So, as this populates, our yellow dots are gun attacks. The large dots are 4 or more casualties. The red dots are knife attacks, and the blue are car attacks, which we've seen an uptick in. If we remember New York City and the rented Home Depot truck driving down a bike path. If somebody has intent to harm a large group of people, there are different ways to do it, but it's how we respond that's important. So how many attacks have we had in the past 20 years? And as you can see, Yeah, we'll go to the next slide. We've had 347 active aggressor events from 2000 to 2019. Now, to classify as an active aggressor event, we use the FBI statistics, and it has to be, there's certain stipulations that have to include it in that count, but that's a lot. 347 attacks in 20 years and spread out everywhere. 2,815 total number of casualties, wounded and killed. That's a lot of people in our society that are affected by these attacks. 1,016 killed in 347 incidents. 1,799 were wounded in 347 incidents. So, we can see that the more that we train as a society, the more that we work together. And like I say all the time, in these attacks, there are more of us than there are them. We outnumber them, we have the advantage. So we have to remember that as well. But the more that these attacks occur, the more and more that we should be working together and make sure that I was just interviewed by the media here last week in Columbus, and her line of questioning was, should people even go out in public anymore? There's been a rash of mall shootings here in Columbus, Ohio. And I said, absolutely, people should go out. We can't allow the criminal element to change the way that we live our lives. So I said, people just need to be trained. They need to have that plan. Like Jamie said, it's as simple as when I walk into an Applebee's, I walk in the front door. Okay, fantastic. But I know there's 3 other exits that I could use if I had to. We just have to be aware of our surroundings and have that good situational awareness. And a lot of times we can see these things happening before they actually are a danger to us. Moving on. Who is an active shooter? Do they always look the same? We know that they don't. They come from every background, every nationality. Obviously, the male shooters are heavily prevalent. 96% of the shooters in the past 20 years have been male. We've had female shooters too, though. So we can't just say, well, the chance is so low of having a female shooter, I don't have to worry about that. Look at our age range, under 19. That's the most, that's a majority of our school shooters. But at the opposite end of that spectrum, over 70. Now, that's taken from a sample of the top 5 years of attacks, but it just goes to show that these shootings can be perpetrated by anyone. There is no profile that we can fit. It's not like a CSI TV show where there's somebody sitting in a room full of computers figuring out who's going to be our next active shooter. We can expect that, but what we can expect is to know that we are empowered and we know what we would do in a situation like this. Like Jamie said, I was trained, I felt calm. And the more we panic, the more we're likely to freeze, the more time it's going to take us to react. And that's what's dangerous. Moving on. What weapons are the most prevalent? Now, we hear a lot about the assault rifles, and that makes up for 28% of the attacks. But why do you think a handgun make up 57% of the attacks? And 16% of them are illegally obtained. 81% are legally obtained. The Sandy Hook shooter took his mom's firearms after he murdered her. And she had a rifle, a shotgun, and a couple handguns in a safe that he had the password to. So it's not always illegally obtained. It's not always going to be a rifle. But why do you think why do you think that the shooters would prefer to use a handgun? Because it's concealable. They don't prefer to just hop out of their car and start shooting. Just like at San Antonio, that guy was trying to get into the terminal where there was a more mass organized group of people. So a lot of times handguns will be prevalent and they'll carry more than one. We've seen that a lot too. And the reason for that is because they want to be able to penetrate an area and then perpetrate their attack there where they think it's going to be more effective. Moving on. So mass shooters and mental stressors. We've studied enough of these to know that the attacker will experience an average of 3.6 stressors in the year prior to the attack. So just because somebody's having a really bad year, does that mean that they're going to be a mass shooter? No, not at all. But these are things as coworkers, family members, social media watchers. I don't have a lot of social media, but I know people that's pretty much all they do all day long. And we start seeing this stuff show up on someone's social media account. It's probably time to tell somebody or get somebody else involved, maybe get some psychiatric care involved. Mental health, job-related, financial strain. How much of this have we seen through the COVID pandemic? Marital problems. How many of these situations branch off of domestic situations? There's nothing more volatile than a domestic situation. And, a lot of times once that desperation is reached, I'm going to hurt my ex-spouse or my current spouse. I'm just going to hurt everybody else too. We see that a lot. Conflicts with families, loss of their home, death of family members or friends, criminal problems. So we'll see these things in their past, specifically in that year leading up to the shooting, because these shootings are planned. They don't just throw a gun in a bag and say, today's the day. They'll scout out their locations. They'll plan with massing amounts of ammo and firearms. They'll go to the range and train to shoot. We see that stuff all the time. So it's things to think about. Because we have to work as a team on this. So if we see someone that their entire demeanor has changed and they seem to be separating themselves from the normal activities that they usually were doing, and they've experienced some of these things, at the very least, it's time to talk to this person or have someone professional talk to them. Moving on. Where do they occur the most? As we can see, 49, almost half of them occur in a place of business. That's a pretty wide range of locations. But, we look at our outdoors in schools. When I first started teaching this, everybody only thought these attacks happened in schools because that's all that the media was covering. It's all that they were talking about. But we now know that, business locations all around the country are very susceptible to these attacks as well. And that's why we need to get out there and train these folks. It's why we need to get their technology up to par, mass communication, panic buttons, things like that. What's our connection to the shooter going to be? No relationship at all over half the time. We're not going to know this person. Jamie didn't know his attacker, but that's not going to stop them from indiscriminately trying to hurt you. But what about being socially connected to this person? It is a coworker. Just because I had coffee every morning for the last 10 years and talked to Joe about his kids, before work started, doesn't mean that once that line is crossed, that I'm going to be able to talk him out of it, or, he's going to walk by me and choose someone else. So we can't treat that any differently. Moving on. So preparedness to empowerment. If we are prepared, we are empowered. And it starts with that prevention. We have to be able to prevent these things by mitigation. Mitigating these attacks, taking that power away from these attackers, it will diminish. They'll help diminish these the numbers that we're seeing. 49 people killed in a nightclub in Orlando. That's just unacceptable. And then we move into that preparedness phase. That's when we start talking about, well, let's get some training in here. Let's talk to our employees about this. Let's talk to our kids about this. Let's create that culture of safety and security. And then our response, scenario training is incredibly important to gauge what our response as a business or as a family unit or as a group will be. Jamie's attended our scenario training, and They're not meant to scare the daylights out of people. They're meant to show people like, look, you hear gunfire, you smell, the gun smoke, and you can react. Don't freeze. You can react to this stuff and survive the day. And scenario training is extremely powerful for that. And then the scenarios may last 2 or 3 minutes at the most sometimes, but then the debrief afterwards, the group talking to each other, sharing ideas, saying, man, I zigged left when I should have, zigged right. Or maybe we should move this filing cabinet here in front of this door if we needed to knock it over and keep somebody out of here. And you see the gears start turning, and a group of people that work together every day are now talking about taking their own safety into their own hands. And that's where the powerful message really comes, is in that debrief. And then recovery empowerment. If there were an attack, if we were involved in something, how do we recover from that and remain empowered? And that's all through training, and that's all through communication with each other. Moving on. And that's what's so great about Safe Passage and Prime and our partnership, because it's cyclic in nature. We start with that physical security and emergency response plan assessment. And here's the ground level where you're at. And this is where we all can agree, you, the client, and us can agree where we want to have it. And then we help develop that plan to minimize vulnerabilities through new policies, training, and technology. So the technology and the training and the policy review all go hand in hand to be that force multiplier for that empowerment, to empower an entire new culture of safety and security. And then we implement those policies, training, and technology. And Jamie, you wanted to speak on that?
Yeah, a little bit. The kind of back to what I said at the beginning, there's really 3 parts to the proper protection within a facility: the people, the process, and the technology, but they have to work together. And with a lot of clients we see, they treat, the assessment piece, the process procedure over here, technology over here, but there's not a lot of intentional work done to combine those. And, it's interesting in San Antonio, there was never an announcement made of what happened or where it was happening. People were guessing for 4 hours, wondering what was going on, because a lot of people didn't know. We were by it, we knew. But a couple minutes into the incident, actually fire alarm went off. So I'm assuming somebody probably pulled a pull station or something. So there was a lot of confusion around what occurred, whether it was a fire or a shooter. And I do think, and I've never worked with that airport. I don't know what technology they have in place, but it would be interesting to see. They clearly planned for it because there were some protocols executed. But from what I witnessed, I would question, did they have a good plan to combine the technology with what they implemented on the process and procedure side to notify individuals in the airport what was going on and what to do? So this is just a critical part, I think, of this entire cycle, that you've got to begin thinking about how do we leverage technology into that. And there's nobody that knows more about it than the people that actually operate it, and companies like Prime, who actually specialize in the technology to help with that process. So I just wanted to add that to that piece of that, Dustin.
Yeah. And then, so once we implement the policies, training, and technology, then we continue with that client. We stay with that client. So then we provide that 24/7 on-call support for critical incident. And then we continue training and testing the technology. So we'll come do scenario training. We'll have people use that technology in the scenarios. Like, look, this is how it works. This is why it works. And we want you to have confidence in it and use it. One of my favorite stories, we were doing an assessment a couple of years ago in this huge facility. And there was this really loud area in the back where these people were working by this continuous belt moving boxes. It was incredibly loud. A lot of them had headphones in, listening to their own music to avoid the noise. And their mass communication system was a loudspeaker. And there was no way these people were going to be able to hear it. So this came up in their training, and I said, we were up at the front desk, and the security officer was sitting there. I said, "What's that big giant green button behind you?" And he says, "Oh, we don't use that." He said, "That's just for tornadoes." I said, "Well, what would happen if you pushed it?" He's like, "Well, it would shut everything down. It would shut all the machines off, and people would know to leave to get out for a tornado." And I said, well, why can't we use that to train for active shooter scenarios? Well, we've never thought about that. Well, when's the last time you tested it? Well, we've never tested it. So there's a lot of stuff like that around the country. Like, why aren't we using this thing in training? And if it doesn't work, why don't we get it fixed to where we can use it? So a lot of times it's just organizations aren't thinking it through. They're not thinking about what they already have existing or what they would need and want to make their people safe. So it's all about building those layers of security and making sure that everybody understands their policies and the procedures and what to do in an event like this. So that's why it's so great that Prime and Safe Passage are able to team up like this and provide everything from beginning to end and after the life of any security or safety project. And then Matt, I think we'll move into the questions portion.
Yes, sir. So thank you very much for all that great information. Great presentation, a lot of knowledge coming out of that. We do have one in the queue and we have several that were asked during registration. So while working in loss prevention behind the cameras, in the event that you see an active shooter or an active threat, after calling 911, what should be the next step? Do we page that there's an active threat? What do you recommend that next process or the next chain of events that should occur in the event that you identify a threat?
I would say that would depend on your mass notification system. Things that Prime can do is like have a mass notification sent out to everyone's phone, or it projects onto all the screens in the building. Once that's done, it's automated, and we want those loss prevention folks to evacuate as well.
Excellent. Next question. How do you practice an active shooter event effectively, especially in a retail environment? What do you recommend a retailer does with their staff to prepare for an event such as this?
I would say training. Reach out and get some training. People will not. A lot of people avoid thinking about this topic just because it's unpleasant, and that's just human nature. But when people are trained and trained properly, there's a lot of training out there that's fear-based and trying to scare people into knowledge, and I don't think that that's effective at all. So doing some research, getting some training, and then reviewing policies and procedures and make sure everything marries up.
Excellent. How do you think that we can do a good job in talking to our kids about these events and about what to do?
That's a great question. And Jamie and I were talking about this. I'll talk about my end of it, and then he can talk about his. I have 3 daughters, and ever since they were able to communicate with me, I've been talking to them about what they would do in any emergency. I like them to be prepared as possible. While it's a terrifying thought for them to be involved in something like this, that possibility does exist. So when I was talking to my daughter when she was 2 is much different than how I'm talking to her now that she's 14. And how I would respond with her with me when she was 2 is different than how I would respond now that she's 14. She can outrun me now. She couldn't when she was 2. I would have picked her up and carried her like a sack of potatoes. But it depends on your children's age. But most of the time, it's easy for them to understand when you say, hey, if a bad guy was to come in this room, I would want you to run really fast that way, or run away from them and run until you're very far away. We don't have to scare them and say active shooter and things like that. So we need to, especially if they're our own children, we know how to communicate with our own children. And it's just like any other talk we have. We talk to them about drugs. We talk to them about sex. We talk to them about fire prevention. All these different topics that we talk to our kids about, or we should be. But for some reason, this topic is avoided sometimes, and we should just talk about it candidly, like we do everything else. What do you think, Jamie?
Yeah, I agree with everything you said, and I would encourage you, if you haven't asked your kids what sort of training they've received at school, what does it look like? What do they tell you? I frankly, for me, I was a little shocked at what my children told me. My son asked one of his teachers a question. I don't recall what it was, a couple of years ago, and the teacher's response was, "I don't know." I asked my daughter, if there's an active shooter in the building, what do they tell you to do? And she's like, "Well, they lock the door and tell us all to get in a corner and hide." And in my head, I'm like, no, why would you get in a dense corner of a room with a bunch of people? If that shooter came in, you would be sitting targets there in a dense area of the room. So I've had all those conversations with them. I've been fortunate enough I've been through the Alice training with these folks, other training, and I'm actually on the security committee at that school. So I was able to take that to them and really start to have serious conversations about how they're treating active shooter situations. And just because you have a plan doesn't mean it's a good plan. So getting involved with the school districts, understanding the plan and giving them direct feedback on other resources and what they need to be looking at, because I love our school systems all across the country and the things they do, but to some it does feel like they're checking a box and not really understanding the situations and how to educate teachers and kids on what to do. So
excellent. So we had another question that relates to that come in during registration. So I guess I'll add to the question, but why do my kids' schools lock down when they should evacuate? And how do you change the mindset of a school that is doing what Jamie's kids' schools are doing and just telling them to get in the corner and we'll lock the door? Because obviously, if they do have the ability to break down a door, that's not going to be a good scenario.
We need to make sure that our schools, and Jamie said it, and I say it all the time, get involved with the principal, with the teachers. We can go into our children's schools and ask them questions, and they'll answer you if they know. But if they're saying anything besides evacuating, if the shooter's inside the building, then that's the wrong answer, and we need to know that. But if there's a bank being robbed 5 blocks away and they're locking the school down, that makes sense. If the threat is outside, now once that threat moves inside, that plan needs to be liquid. It needs to be able to change. So a lot of schools are really bent on accountability. So they're terrified to tell kids to scatter in every direction, because now we have to tell parents we don't know where your kid is. And I told a principal, actually as a superintendent one time, I said, well, I'd rather count my child out in the community than count my child here on the ground. And that they did eventually change their policies, because, it's like, how am I going to count these kids? Well, we can do reunification drills. We can, provide other ways of having accountability. Technology plays a big part in that too. There's options for that now, but get involved with with the leadership at the school and make sure that their policies make sense. If they're locking down and hiding in a corner of the room and putting a piece of paper over the window to block view from there when there's a shooter in the school, that's the wrong answer, and we immediately need to get that changed.
Excellent. And two-part question again. Part of it's in the live queue, part of it's in our registration queue. So who should be involved in developing an emergency response plan, and how often would you suggest loss prevention to be engaged with their first responders to help with the planning for incidents?
Yeah, I love when LP works with their local law enforcement. I think that's fantastic, especially these large facilities. We're talking a distribution facility or something like that. Get your local police, your first responders, sheriff's offices, get their tactical teams in there, invite them in for coffee, let them walk around, let them see the layout of your building. As a SWAT officer, I didn't want to run into a 750,000 square foot building and never been in it before. It's just a tactical nightmare. So most jurisdictions will be happy to do that. Reach out with them, even see if we could organize a drill with them. But as far as your threat assessment team and developing those policies and procedures, you should have someone from every department involved, especially HR, folks from the C-suite, LP, send those delegates from each sections. So we have all those different thought processes, because obviously some divisions of a industry don't work the same way as LP. They don't think the same way. So it's good to get everybody's head together and come up with those ideas and plans together.
Absolutely.
I'm going to add to that. The other thing, there was a great article I read about a year ago, and I can't remember where it came out of an LP organization somewhere. But they made a great point in the article that a lot of times end users are afraid to involve their integrator as part of those committees. So what I would encourage people to do is think about, I know you don't want a sales guy in there, but getting an engineer, a technical person who understands those systems at a very deep level involved in some of those conversations can often significantly contribute to those conversations on what the technology can do and how they can help benefit their process and procedure. So I just wanted to add to that, Matt.
Excellent. We have time for one more question, then we have a couple of announcements. So does the implementation of an armed security guard prove to be a better deterrent to active shooters in the retail setting?
It can. It depends on how that person is being utilized. A lot of times, if they're from outside of that company, they don't really have that loyalty or that bought-in attitude. A lot of times we can replace those armed security guards with technology and training, and we've done that successfully. So it can be a deterrent if it's used right, but so can turnstiles, so can card readers, facial recognition cameras, license plate readers, those things. When an offender looks at things like that, they may be a lot less likely to attack that location.
Absolutely.
And
all right,
hey,
so
Matt,
go ahead, Jamie.
Matt, there was one question that came up I want to make sure to address because it looks like it got misinterpreted, but there was a question about a run in a K through 12 situation and getting out of the facility that came in. I just want to make clear that the importance of getting proper training is determined when it's right to run and get out of the facility, and when it's right to hide, and when it's right to attack. I just want to make sure what Dustin said wasn't misinterpreted as run in all situations. I just want to reemphasize that's why training is important, because there are situations where you don't run, there are situations where you do hide, and there are situations where you do attack. So I just wanted to clarify that to make sure that wasn't misinterpreted.
No, absolutely. Great point, and thank you for calling that out. We do have a couple of announcements before we let everyone go. First and foremost, if you are interested in getting LP certified, Prime Secured has sponsored a 20% discount for the Loss Prevention Foundation memberships as well as our courses. The promo code is empowerment, all in caps. We will be giving away 5 LPC course scholarships courtesy of Prime Secured to 5 random attendees. So be on the lookout for the post-webinar email that you'll receive tomorrow. I highly encourage you to follow Prime Communications, Prime Secured, and Safe Passage Consulting on LinkedIn as well as Facebook. You will have information in that post-webinar email that details out how to get in touch with them, as well as the information and a link to the recording. Thank you so much for joining. We look forward to having you on our next LPF webinar. Stay safe, and we look forward to seeing you real soon. Thank you.